If you or someone you know says, oh, sleep, I have no problem with that. I can fall asleep anytime, anywhere. The minute my head hits a pillow, I'm out. That actually is not a great sign. And that is a big red flag that there might be something awry with your sleep.
Mollie Eastman, she is the creator of Sleep is a Skill and host of the Sleep is a Skill podcast and is on a mission to transform how we sleep. Her company, blending technology, accountability, and behavioral changes, optimizes sleep for the masses. Inspired by her own insomnia struggle while traveling, Mollie crafted a unique approach to mastering sleep. With expertise in behavioral change and a fascination with chronobiology, she improves sleep one person at a time. Mollie is dedicated to sharing this forgotten skill set. She hosts the #2 Sleep podcast, a 5-year weekly sleep newsletter, luxury hotel partnerships. She coaches top poker players, and she has appeared on over 150 podcasts.
We're looking to align with the rhythms of nature as much as possible, even in our modern society. One of the most important things that we can do that so few people are doing is we want to create.
Hi, my name is Chris Burris. I'm a longevity expert and the chief scientist at a lab focused on a longevity molecule. My primary focus is to help people live longer and better lives with science. Make sure to subscribe and share so you and your friends can live longer and better. Well, actually, so you and your friends can live beyond the norms. Hi, and welcome to the next talk on the Uncovering the Secrets of Longevity, Live Beyond the Norms Health Summit. If you follow what I talk about on social media, and if you heard part of the PR campaign my friend Patrick Wanis and I did during the pandemic to actually help people with their emotions and sleep, you will know that I regularly talk about the importance of sleep. I describe sleep as one of the most healing and restorative medicines that you could possibly prescribe or implement. Our next speaker hosts the Sleep is a Skill podcast. I have to share that recently sleeping competitions have come across my feeds, I don't know why, maybe because I'm talking about the feeds, literally sleeping competitions. Yes, they exist. And I'm certainly going to check in with her to see if she's coaching anybody on these sleeping competitions. Let me introduce Mollie Eastman. She is the creator of Sleep is a Skill and host of the Sleep is a Skill podcast and is on a mission to transform how we sleep. Her company, blending technology, accountability, and behavioral changes, optimizes sleep for the masses. Inspired by her own insomnia struggle while traveling, Mollie crafted a unique approach to mastering sleep. With expertise in behavioral change and a fascination with chronobiology, she improves sleep one person at a time and maybe one champion at a time. Maybe you could be the next sleep champion. Mollie is dedicated to sharing this forgotten skill set. She hosts the #2 Sleep podcast, a 5-year weekly sleep newsletter, luxury hotel partnerships. She coaches top poker players. That's just fascinating. And she has appeared on over 150 podcasts. Mollie, thank you for joining us today. And I have to ask, are you coaching any sleeping champions?
I would not say I am. And the reason is that many times, and I've spoken about this at different points, many times when we see some of these sleep challenges, it's a barrage of undiagnosed sleep disorders or potentially diagnosed but untreated sleep disorders because, practical takeaway from anyone listening. If you or someone you know says, oh, sleep, I have no problem with that. I can fall asleep anytime, anywhere. The minute my head hits a pillow, I'm out. That actually is not a great sign. And that is a big red flag that there might be something awry with your sleep, whether it's sleep deprivation of kind of a circumstantial or, kind of choices, or something lurking as far as the many sleep disorders. We know there's around 100 sleep-wake disorders that could be present that are very often go undiagnosed. And one of those signs can be quickly falling asleep, which is kind of part and parcel to some of those challenges. So we don't always want that.
You're more focused on helping people get to a baseline, a healthy baseline, than letting them be championship sleepers.
Exactly, and quantifiably so. So I take a real tech lean. I think that's why, it works with a lot of the poker players I work with. So they are great with data and they respond really well to the numbers side of things. So every person we work with is required to wear at least the Aura ring to participate in our programs. Although we do get a lot of kind of self-proclaimed biohackers, so they might have many other pieces of tech that they're, for better or worse. But so we're looking at a lot of numbers at least, and so we can quantifiably see what are some of those key distinguishing factors that can facilitate good sleep. And we can get into what that looks like. And it might be more than just duration, which a lot of people might think of, well, it's all about getting 8 hours. And that's not exactly the case.
All right. I have so many questions, right? Before we jump into that, so how do you need to make a podcast, a website, Sleep is a Skill? What gets you to that point?
Yeah. So I hope that this is helpful for the listener, because my story is one of really solving my own problem. I never anticipated that I would be in this role of talking about sleep 24/7. And yet now I'm so grateful that this happened. So that if you're ever dealing with any problems with your sleep, know that there's an opportunity to kind of uncover some things about yourself and your life that can actually improve your life on the other side of it. And that was certainly what happened for me. I now like to think of our sleep as a barometer of the workability of our lives, and that if your sleep is not working, there's likely something underneath that might not be serving you, whether you realize it or not. And certainly I didn't realize some of the things that I was doing. So what my story is I think of my life now as a 3-part series as of today. And so
not on Netflix yet.
Not on Netflix yet, exactly. But what it kind of amounts to is before I went through this real kind of sleep breakdown, this period of time where I felt like sleep was not available to me reliably, this whole stretch of time where I wasn't able to get that sleep that I had, thought was just a given. And so before that period, during that, and after. And so before that, what it looked like was just I wasn't thinking about my sleep that much. I was just relating to it as a lot of labels and narratives around my sleep in a fixed state. I would say I'm a short sleeper. I'm a night owl. It's in my genes. I'll sleep when I'm dead. All of these kind of ways of relating to sleep as just something that's kind of, put on you, and then you're just surviving that lot. I wasn't correlating some of the, kind of poor health results that I was having as being at all linked to any of my habits. So what that looked like is I had the beginnings of an ulcer, shingles in my 20s, a lot of anxiety kind of mounting. And I wasn't noticing or looking at how that was kind of nicely coinciding with more and more acute behaviors with my sleep. So going to bed later and later, going and being justified and righteous the whole time about it, and saying, well, I'm a serial entrepreneur in Manhattan, burning the candle at both ends. What's the big deal? I'll just sleep in later. No problems here. And it wasn't until I went through this period of insomnia that everything really changed for me. And during that period, what that ended up looking like was kind of a rock bottom moment when I finally went to the doctors and left with sleeping pills, which is not supposed to be the first thing that you're doing to address sleep disturbances. It is supposed to now be CBTI, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. But sadly, many people do leave with different sleeping pills, and that's what happened for me. And so then that kind of lit the fire under me to figure out how can I kind of ensure that I'm not going down a path of being hooked on pharmaceuticals or dependent in a way that would be for something that you would consider to be a given, which is sleep. And so what that kind of created was this whole quest to figure this out. And I spent a lot of time, money, energy, effort in doing that. Things that worked, things that didn't work. But in the process, by getting my sleep back to baseline, which I shared wasn't even that great before. Then I got to actually move into optimizing my sleep, which I didn't even realize was available to me. And so what was amazing was actually getting to turn upside down all these identities and labels and narratives that I had, and actually rewriting my relationship with my sleep and learning some of the things that we'll likely touch on today, like circadian rhythm entrainment, chronobiology, and really just left with a sense of like, why are we not all talking about this? This is so game changing. And I really am confident that these will be things that we will have as kind of the blueprint for wellness in the future, by which then our innovations around nutrition, exercise, certain things in well-being, meditation, et cetera, can be layered on top of from a time perspective. Because we look at a lot of these things that can help our health and well-being, but we're not always considering the times by which we're doing these things and how that can affect all the clocks in our bodies and our bodies. So I think that that's a really important distinction and can make the difference in your sleep.
So I got one thing that just stood out for me is you've used the word workability and how sleep has a workability nature. And certainly, I'll sleep when I dead is not a workable,
Yes.
has
Right.
little or no workability in the context
Absolutely.
of sleep. So sleep is, on the surface, right? On the maybe not even the 50,000 foot view, but the 100,000 foot view is just useless, right? Like if we're an animal and we're trying to survive, we really need three things. We need to be eating, finding food, finding a mate, and making sure that we're defending ourselves. And while we're sleeping, which is about a third of our life, we can do none of those. And we've had millions of years to evolve and get rid of that useless thing. What do we know about sleep? Like, what's important about sleep? Why is it still sticking around?
Yeah, absolutely. Great questions. So one, to your point, from an evolutionary perspective, we haven't been able to override this feature of being human. And it's one of the things that we do see is that we struggle to find a single domain of life that is not negatively impacted when our sleep is not working as well as we might like it to. So that can trickle into things as clear as, of course, your duration with your sleep and the sleep results, but it gets way more layered than that. So it goes into cognitive and brain health, emotional, mental health, physical health, immunity. It can get into your metabolism, cardiovascular health, but it can keep extending into your overall experience of life. I mentioned that I work predominantly with a lot of high stakes poker players, and their ability to even emotionally regulate at the table is massively impacted. Your ability to read faces. So my husband is a expert in nonverbal communication and reading people. And so we see that the impacts of your ability to have that agility or the ability to read, faces, dynamically can be impacted by just not getting enough sleep. So it's really endless of the negative impacts. And then on the flip side, the nice thing is if we start to dial these things in, all of those things can really improve in every domain of life. So the spidering out can really be impactful. But then even just on, probably one thing that's kind of important for people is things like all-cause mortality, death from any cause, and things and rates of that go up when we see things as simple as sleeping as reliably less than around 6 hours routinely. Now, of course, there's some bioindividuality, but it appears that was out of a big study in 2010, a meta-analysis that found that there's many things that can go awry, just even on that duration side of things, let alone what's the regularity of that sleep, what's the fragmentation of that sleep. There's a lot more in-depth information we'd want to know about that. But when we think of just that, it's diabetes, heart disease, stroke, cognitive decline, and that death from any cause can go up just from those numbers not being properly logged. So that is just one component that tags on of that overall experience of life being massively impacted.
Yeah, you said that there's not a single domain that it doesn't impact, and we actually just recently went through the biannual research experiment that we do where we sacrifice 1 hour of sleep or we add 1 hour of sleep. There's some pretty dramatic shifts in the health. Is there anything you could share about daylight savings time when we add it and remove it and that massive, I don't know, 2 billion person experiment that we do?
I have so many thoughts about that. Oh, geez. I'm glad you touched on that because, one, I am a big proponent of having people join this proverbial team standard time. And I'd really like for people to take action in any way that they can. So you can, contact your local politician or legislature to really aim to get this thing abolished, this process of bringing in daylight saving time. Because what are some of the impacts? Well, we see accidents rates go up, cardiovascular events, of course, disruptions to our sleep-wake patterns, but also things that seem to be a little bit harder to distinguish, but things like, depressive tendencies, anxiety, just because we know that some of those things go up with circadian dysregulation, which is what it's putting us into. Why is it putting us into that? Well, daylight saving time is really this man-made creation of having us be about an hour off from the real rhythms of nature for the stretch of time that it's in place. And so that's creating this social jet lag. And so it's a self-created jet lag where we're not aligned with the rhythms of nature in the way that our body has been trained to be for thousands of years. And instead, we're kind of off kilter during that entire time when it's in place. And then, of course, when you take it away and move over to standard time, then there's kind of that jostling dance that happens when you're trying to now move to this arbitrary new time. The same way you feel off when you travel across multiple time zones, same rules apply.
Yeah. Okay. So, and I heard one because you talked about cardiac events. I think the numbers somewhere in the range of 20 to 25% increase in heart attacks on the morning that we lose an hour of sleep, and 25% decrease, 21 to 25% decrease in heart attacks on the day that we gain an hour. So, like, I think a lot of people don't have that. I think that's so important because a lot of people don't have this dramatically impacts you physiologically, right? So great, we're tired, we're cranky, whatever. We can have an extra cup of coffee. I think people, well, I'll sleep when I'm dead. Like those all things get mold together. And then I'll say, then you say, yeah, you will sleep when you're dead, and you'll be dead a lot sooner, right?
Yes.
All-cause mortality going up. I think that's terrifying. So you talked a little bit about circadian rhythm. Why is it essential for sleep, health, mood, waistline? That's always nice.
Yeah, absolutely. I have been running around speaking on this topic and acting like Nostradamus on what I proclaim and really presume or trends that we'll see in the future of medicine and wellness and health and well-being is this layering of the blueprint of our circadian rhythm by which we'll then put in some of these things that we do to make a difference with our health. So meaning, so our circadian rhythm is this rhythm that's around 24 hours, and it keeps us as human beings. We're diurnal creatures, meaning that we're meant to be active by day and at rest at night. And what we start to see is that if we deviate from some of those rhythms, we have very real world negative effects to the point. And what group do we look at to really give us some reliable information about that? Are shift workers. So people that are doing nothing more than being active at night, essentially, or at times when presumably we'd like to, or we'd imagine that we're supposed to be sleeping. And we do see a number of things go up in those groups, like cancer rates, diabetes, mental health disturbances, and of course, our sleep-wake patterns being disrupted. And so with those groups, to the point that actually just this year was released a kind of call to arms. It appeared in Frontiers, and it was a bundling, if you will, of 200 and almost 50 circadian scientists, all citing almost 2,700 peer-reviewed research papers that are pointing to the deleterious effects of having light at night. So what they're calling for is actually warning labels on light bulbs when used at night. And the why for that is that when we do that, that impacts our melatonin production and brings that load down. down and brings about some of those problems that we pointed to with shift workers. And so even if you're not shift working, but you're inside in your indoor space, but you have all these lights on at night, and that's tagged onto the fact that why would this be a problem? Well, in 2001, we saw that the EPA did a study and they found that the average American was spending at least around 90% of their day, if you bring in automobiles, around 93% of your day indoors in an enclosed environment. That is actually taking us away from these rhythms of nature, both the light dark cycles, but also the temperature change that happens. And those are two really important elements that tell the body what time it is and what to be doing when. And if you remove those, like we've done as being kind of indoor zoo animals now we're not getting those same signals and cues in the ways that we used to. So that's where the circadian piece becomes so important. What are some of the real world effects of that? Things like the amount of time that we see patients in hospitals of their speed of recovery. And we know that when you bring in there's multiple studies to point to that when you bring in more of the circadian aligned lighting in hospital environments, there seems to be a speed up of recovery time. And since it's very expensive every single day to have a patient in a hospital, these numbers and stats are important. So that's one example, but for the rest of us, for our day-to-day living, how could we have more circadian aligned environments? So my estimation is that we'll see more building biology leading spaces. So your temperature will automatically shift in a circadian aligned way. Your lighting will automatically shift in a circadian aligned way. We'll be eating in more of a circadian aligned way. So less of this nighttime eating and more eating when the sun has set. So it's called circadian rhythm intermittent fasting. So a number of these things we can actually bring in to enact and improve our sleep-wake cycle. So both you sleep better, but then also your experience of life is better when you are awake.
So you just great. That's a great kind of layout of circadian rhythms are impacted by temperatures and light and how we eat, and then you threw in intermittent fasting, and that begs that we're just so used to the traditional 3 meals a day. Does intermittent fasting interrupt our circadian rhythm? Is there an optimal? Some people, I tend to skip breakfast. Maybe that's not good. Some people tend to skip dinner on their intermittent fast. Is there kind of an optimal with intermittent fasting?
Yes, such a great point. So we did have one of the premier researchers in this area, Dr. Sachin Panda, on the podcast, which was really a fascinating topic. And so pulling from some of his research at the Salk Institute, decades of research, some of the things that he has pointed to is that certainly clearly one of the things that seems to be very strong resolve that we want to at least have about 3 hours before bed of our last bite of food to give sufficient time for that digestion process, and that's not impacting our sleep, particularly in that first half when we're looking to really cultivate deep sleep, et cetera. And with the circadian aligned piece, then it has us really look at one, could we more front load our calories a bit more so that we're eating largely when the sun is present and less when the sun has set? And some of the reasons for this is kind of the interactions between the pancreas and melatonin. And so when the sun has set, if we are having, so in that darkness, that helps cultivate the production of that melatonin. But if the pancreas is active with having to digest all that food, that can be at odds with our ability to produce sufficient melatonin. And so we don't want to impede that. And so part of our way to support that can be to move back our last bite of food a bit earlier to facilitate that down regulation that happens. Because melatonin is not like an Ambien or anything. It's something that prepares the body to cool, to lower that, certainly that body temperature, but also our heart rate and a number of other elements that can help facilitate sleep onset down the road. So if there are things that we can do, like abstaining from just, kind of the snacks and the things that we might do into the evening, those are some very clear things that we can do to help support improving our sleep. Other things that come up a lot on a practical application of things, since every person we do work with is wearing the Oura Ring, so we see a lot of data. And we do see a lot of rates of those nighttime awakenings go up when people are eating, closer to when they're going to bed, but also when they have that instability in their glucose. So we have a lot of people wearing continuous glucose monitors, and very quickly they often start to see, oh, geez, I'm crashing my glucose throughout the course of the night for many people. And when that crash happens, then that's when those wake ups can often occur in that 3-4 in the morning time frame. And so part of our goal with that can be, how can we both bring about more stability to our glucose by day? Because what's going on by day often gets mirrored at night. So that's an important piece. If you're anxious by day, you're likely to have anxiety signs in your kind of biometrics in the evening. But same rules apply with something like glucose. So we want to bring some stability to that, but also front load that a bit more than the average person is doing.
Hey, super quick break from the podcast. Hopefully you're loving it. This is a way you can support the podcast and take advantage of a great offer. We're offering 50% off of one of our MCT bottles. MCT is an amazing oil. Add the ESS 60 molecule to it. It's even more amazing. All you got to do is leave a review on iTunes, send us a notification that you've left that review. We'll get you a coupon code that'll get you 50% off of our MCT oil and free shipping. Back to the podcast.
Okay, so you've made a good case, right? Like this impacts everything. Circadian rhythm really ties us to sleep. I did see one of your testimonials on your site talked about losing 30 pounds, which is not the first thing you think of when you think of sleep is a skill, right? Like a sleep is a skill trainer. And then you mentioned anxiety, and I just want to bring this up. Kind of briefly mentioned in the intro that my really good friend Patrick Wanis and I did this PR tour, and I kind of likened it. A lot of people don't realize that a lack of sleep it gives you less skill to be able to handle your emotions, right?
Yes.
And so then the next day you're doing things that emotionally you probably wouldn't do, right? Arguments that are not necessary or whatever. And then you end up ruminating about them. And I called it this horrible emotional sleep spiral, right? Like it's just out of control. And you're talking about, hey, let's get some practical things like circadian rhythms when we're eating. And I want to jump into a few more practical, but before we get there, you've mentioned Oura Ring a couple times. I have one. I don't have it on. Actually, mine's old enough that it doesn't hold charge all the way through the day and through the night. So I just leave it at home during the day, charging. And we actually did a sleep study because that's one of the things that our customers tend to report is taking it in the morning and better sleep at night. So we did this kind of cool study. But let's stay focused on the sleep tracker. You've looked across the landscape. What is the accuracy? And my son had a sleep study, right? So he's got all the electrodes all over his head. And I've read a couple papers about the difference between that kind of study and what a Whoop can do, what an Apple Watch can do. Talk a little bit about why it's your favorite and kind of its accuracy relative to the different sleep phases.
Yeah. So certainly we're in an interesting and exciting time as far as consumer grade trackers, and there's certain limitations for sure with the consumer grade trackers. So a couple of things. One, we do happen to, this has been for years now using the Oura Ring, but it's not to dissuade from the use of other trackers. I also have a Whoop band on, work with BioStrap, Garmin, Apple Watch. We've utilized things like Dream headbands, other pieces of tech. So there's lots of benefits from some of the other pieces as well. Now with Oura, one of the things that is interesting, we just had them on the podcast, just since they changed their algorithm, and which actually has been for any longtime Oura user, there's been some upset with some of for a lot of people, not everyone, but for a lot of people on some of the change with the algorithm, because it did highlight something that I've been trying to really shout from the rooftops for a while, which is that so far our sleep stage classifications on these wearable trackers are still, of all the data on them, is the least accurate. And it's gotten better. So with the update for Oura Ring, at least speaking to that, they are now comparing this new algorithm to about 1,500 nights of PSG data, and they're pretty well suited to be in alignment with that. So, and it gets more layered because the PSG data, there's still only an agreement with that gold standard piece of tech around the mid 80s% of time. So like low to mid 80s as far as agreement with, different sleep techs that would be looking at that same data. So there can be
just real quick, PSG, is that the full like electrodes all over?
Yes, exactly. Okay. So when you go into a sleep lab, so even that quote unquote gold standard still has questions. That's still only around 85% of the time in accuracy. So it's not as much of a one-to-one where, the same way where we could look and say, well, is this person asleep or awake? We have a bit more ability to kind of understand that piece, and that has higher accuracy on our wearable trackers, more in the low 90s. So are you asleep or you're awake is usually pretty good. Certainly things like heart rate, HRV. HRV gets a little bit more layered, but body temperature, respiratory rate, and now blood oxygen, some of those are a bit more clear data points, whereas the sleep stage classifications, and I've seen so many thought leaders that have incredible information and putting out really important things, but over the years, it's been alarming how much they'll put stake in some of these sleep stage classifications as if they are really, really accurate. And they've gotten better, but that's why I think there was so much upset when Oura Ring changed, because so many people went from 3 hours of deep sleep down to like an hour. And so if you were making a lot of decisions on those, that can be sort of problematic. So instead, what I would suggest is looking at some of the generalized trends within your wearable, not cross-comparing wearables because they're using totally different algorithms, particularly for those sleep stages. And so any wearable that's on the hand and wrist or just not on the brain is really making its best guess, because sleep stage classification are more brain-based understanding of what stage you're in. So with that, taking that with what you will of the least accurate on those wearables, and then instead you might be able to make a lot more, gain a lot more insight from things that point to your nervous system activity, like for the Oura Ring is the readiness page. So their heart rate, HRV, body temperature, respiratory rate, blood oxygen. And so that can give us a lot of information, particularly around behavior. So one of the easiest things that people see often is things like, oh, geez, when I have a drink, just one drink, how much that will show up, or THC, or certain medications, and things like supplements, stress, light dark rhythms when you're eating, certainly the temperature piece of both ambient and then what you're sleeping on, et cetera. So it can get more layered on some of those numbers.
So we probably need to have another conversation, because I actually was working with a consultant for Oura Ring. He's a University of California associate professor, and we had some fascinating conversations about like drinking and its impact, and we could probably go off on that. I want to stay a little bit focused here. When you're talking about the different stages of sleep, right? I know when on my Oura Ring, I basically don't get deep sleep according to Oura Ring, right? Which I don't think is accurate.
Sure.
Because I feel really good. But I haven't also had an AGS. Is that what?
PSG. Yes.
I haven't had a PSG. My son has, but I haven't. So maybe I'm just devoid of it. But I know that there's REM, there's NREM. Really, the Oura Ring talks about REM, doesn't even talk about NREM at all. Maybe that's just deep sleep. What are the different stages, and like what are the importance of those stages?
Yeah. So as far as, a couple of things. One, when we're thinking about our stages of sleep, and if we're talking about a wearable, and kind of making sense of those kind of stages that will come out on a wearable. One, if we're going through the lens of not getting too stressed, because I like your approach to it as far as seemingly not being impacted by it, but I'll have a lot of people that get really impacted, right? And so then they're really,
I don't get any deep sleep. I think I'm dying.
Yeah, pretty much.
I get it.
Exactly. And so what we're looking at is, to simplify it, is throughout the course of the night, say if we're getting 8 hours, which is kind of a myth of, that's the perfect, amount of time. It's certainly a myth. But if, say, you have 8 hours of sleep, on the first half of that night we expect that we're moving into a bit more of a higher proportion of deep sleep on that first part of the night. And then we're transitioning, and the process of that is, different periods of going through different stages of sleep. So into your light sleep, and there can be elements of REM that might still show up for some people, but by and large, the most REM that we're then moving into is in the early morning hours. And what's noteworthy about that, those two kind of, if you think of it as a two-part system for our sleep, on the first half of the night, more propensity towards deep sleep, and we're starting to really cool the body, get really into those lower periods of our sleep, that rich sleep, and there's things that we can do to help facilitate that. But then in the wee hours of the morning, the time when a lot of people might start having some of their wake ups, that 3, 4 in the morning from a general time frame, then we are often moving into that REM and a higher amount of that. So that's when a body temperature is starting to move back up again slowly. And then our brain activity looks so much more active during that period. And it can look akin to kind of what we look like when we're awake throughout the course of the day. It's very odd how active that can be. And so when you're moving into that is the piece that's really particularly important. It's all important for a number of things, but it appears to be important for some of that emotional regulation that you pointed to. You can almost think of it as like your inner therapist. And that's on the early morning hours. Now, one thing that's kind of interesting about when we think of the strategy of sleep is we might assume that as long as we just get that same amount of time that we always log, then we're good. But it turns out that but our body tries to pull for consistency. And if you just go to bed later than your normal time, then what tends to get lobbed off is more that deep sleep, because the body tries to stay on time. And then you're moving into having a higher proportion of REM sleep. But then on the flip side, if you're someone that's saying, oh, I need to get up really early, I've got to get to the gym or whatever, what you're cutting into is that REM portion. And that can then be problematic for some of that emotional regulation piece, among many other things that it certainly does. But it's one key component.
I think some people could argue if you're going to the gym too early, you're an emotional wreck. But that's just kidding.
I know. Gyms are going to really hate me for this stuff. Yeah.
Actually, that's what Mollie said. That I didn't say that.
Yeah, I can't go to the gym now because I listen to this podcast.
So I think we could just keep talking. I want to be mindful of time. So, one, I just kind of this tongue in cheek question: how many pillows have you tried in your quest for the perfect pillow? Like, I just have to know. Oh my
God, that's so funny. I have so many pillows. I have so many pillows. So actually, I've never gotten that question ever, and I love that because there are a lot. What's funny? I still wouldn't say. I don't know if this is some like Princess and the Pea problem of mine or what, but I wouldn't say that I've found like the perfect pillow yet. Maybe. I don't know. Maybe I need to go a stretch of time without pillows or something to appreciate the pillows that I have. But some sort of deep,
or you just sleep on the pea, only the pea.
Only the pea, exactly. Yeah. So, but yeah, I've gone through a lot of pillows. I wouldn't say that I have some like amazing one that's my favorite of all time, and I kind of oscillate through a lot of them. And I try different things, kind of little experiments of different side sleeping and different things that I'll be doing with, because, people will send whatever, mouth tape or different inserts, or I'm testing different things. So I might be sleeping on different positions to test those things. So different pillows can work better for different sleep positions, among other issues.
I think, yeah. So what I'm kind of hearing is you keep trying, find the thing that works, and that might not work forever, right? Like, I've had shoulder injuries at different times, like,
Yes,
and now I'm sleeping differently. Like
totally.
that is exactly what's going on. At the last biohacking conference, Dave Asprey's conference in
Yes.
Orlando, my wife picked up these pillows that like have droopy spots, right? So they cover your eyes and go down your face and do a little kind
The
of.
sleep crown. Yes, they're great.
That's amazing. Yeah. So that's and she had kind of steered me down the wrong path. I had these thick foam padded things, and yeah. So now she's back. She's got an A+ now because
Amazing.
that's really really going good. Let's just do like one or two tips that people could take away from this, like improve your sleep. With one or two tips, and then we'll kind of get to our wrap up questions.
Okay. So unequivocally, I know I threw out a lot of things, circadian rhythm, circadian fasting, chronobiology, all of these things. The biggest takeaway is that we're looking to align with the rhythms of nature as much as possible, even in our modern society. So what would that look like? Well, one of the most important things that we can do that so few people are doing, and I get it, it's challenging, is we want to create bright days, dark nights. That's our big goal. So, and that could sound simple, like, oh, well, okay, fine, just turn on a light, but it's not that simple because indoor environments on average tend to be around sub 1000 lux. So that's an output of the intensity of the light. And so that's a problem because we outside can get up to around 100,000 lux on a very bright day, in the summer or what have you. But certainly even anywhere from say, 5,000 lux to around 100,000 lux could be a range that you might see when going outside. That is markedly brighter than what's happening indoors, even if it feels bright. Like I've got lots of windows around here, and this is still not going to be sufficient to get really still optimal lighting, and not just optimal lighting for lighting's sake, but to be excitatory, boost up that sleep drive later on into the evening, tell the body what time it is and what to be doing when, and reset that master clock. So in the morning, you want to have that consistent wake up time around 7 days a week, which in and of itself, most people don't do. But so if you start there, then you're looking to marry that consistent wake up time with sunlight anchoring processes. So you're looking to get yourself physically outside with no sunglasses or hats or anything, and getting that bright light in your eyes on the first half of your day, married as closely as possible to your wake up time. Then you're looking to get as much bright light by day as you can. Flip side is exactly the opposite. When the sun sets, you're looking to get your environment as dim to dark as humanly possible. Certainly when you're sleeping, totally dark. But if you're looking obviously to be kind of normal and do some things post sunset, then we would like to see either things like red light, Himalayan salt lamps, amber bulbs, candlelight, fire, etc. Those things that we did for thousands of years, kind of before the last 144 since Edison created the light bulb. We feel like this is so normal, but it's really pretty new in the stretch of time that we've been on this planet.
Yeah. Okay. So wake up early, the same time every day of the week. So don't sleep in on weekends, right? And
Yes.
and we're probably all guilty of that, except for
Right.
the really
Totally.
ardent ones. Maybe you're not.
Yeah. No, I've been there. Jeez,
Right?
I used to do everything wrong.
And then get anchored to sunlight, right? So
Yes.
that you really start that circadian rhythm so that it's in line with the rising and falling of the sun. Excellent. All right. So I've got some wrap up questions for you.
Great.
Do you, related to the longevity summit, right? Do you have a target age that you want to live to?
Yeah, good question. I don't have it as a out there goal of a particular timeline, but I would like to have optimal mobility and movement and kind of passions and projects for the length of time that I'm on this planet. So I would like to see that piece being at least, I would like to get into that centenarian timeline because why not? But certainly, right? Not just for a number's sake, but the experience of life being profound throughout that would be the goal.
Yeah. Enjoy more of the profundity.
Yeah.
All right. So next, how long do you think humans can live?
So this is interesting. I was just on a podcast earlier today that was talking about how, lifespans used to be so much shorter years back. And that does absolutely is true. And yet we would also see for people that were able to avoid, infections, pregnancy, deaths, and certain things that would often take people out. Then there were certainly instances of people living quite long. And so it does appear that we are able to certainly get past that centenarian age. So I see that as a possibility, although my concern is with the way that we've created our Western society of, retirement in our 60s and what have you, we see a lot of problems amount when people have that lack of purpose, lack of movement into those later years. So how can we, kind of not be at odds on those topics?
Yeah. I think it's still undetermined, right?
Yeah.
All right. So you did give us a couple of sleep tips. Now, what are 2 to 3 protocols, habits, mindsets? Let's call them shortcuts because everybody likes shortcuts that you can give for longevity and a long health span.
Okay. One, walking. Walking. And we see that for hunter-gatherers, that our understanding is that they're walking much more than we are. And so even I'm saying that in a present tense, in the very small groups that we have to observe, some of our estimations appear to be between around 10,000 to 18,000 steps a day for some hunter-gatherer tribes that we can look to. And then some can be long or more if they are the hunters of the tribe. And so that can range. But certainly, it's clear that it's a lot more than the average. Some people speak to some estimations of around 3,000 steps a day for the average American for some of these numbers. Now, it's questionable to how these are being pulled, but we can assume that we're not moving as much as we used to. And so from that place, one of the reasons I love the walking from a circadian perspective is it does a lot of things all at once. So it gets you outside, gets that light. We see also lowering, so it's kind of an anti-anxiety effect, helpful for heart rate, HRV, a number of other kind of spilling out of benefits with that one practice. So that would be one of my first big ones. Of course, the prioritization of sleep, not to be repetitive, but I think just having that as your first foundation, by which then you're layering on all these other things, can be really, really impactful. And then I would also just bring in this growth mindset piece, because sadly, I mean, a lot of these things that we're talking about are so out of the bounds of what our modern society is doing. So you are going to have to be kind of outside of the bell curve for what most people are doing to even enact some of these things. So to have that growth mindset, to take the time to listen to this, kind of summit and conversations, and not have it that, well, because my grandmother had this problem or X, Y, or Z, then it's just kind of, that's the way it is for me. That growth mindset versus that fixed mindset, I think is going to be important to actually have these things come into your life and not just be like a nice idea.
All right. Walking, sleep, of course, and growth mindset. I love it. Mollie, how can people reach you?
So you can go to the Sleep is a Skill website, so sleepisaskill.com, and there you can do a bunch of things. So one, we have a free downloadable PDF that I believe we're going to be setting you all up with through this as well. So it's an optimized bedroom, so 18 high-tech, low-tech things that you can do to improve your bedroom environment to start. You can also take a sleep assessment so that you can get tailored things back around advice and things that you can do to help support your sleep. From what you might be dealing with, signing you up for our weekly newsletter that's called Sleep Obsessions. And so you can get that every Monday, as well as our sleep podcast. And then if you're really struggling, then we do have online courses, one-on-ones, and something called a sleep audit. So if you have any wearable data, we can audit your wearable data and give you some kind of tailored things that you can do to improve those numbers.
Awesome. And so last question, what in the near future are you excited about?
Oof. I would say some of the things that we got to touch on today, which are the circadian aligned building biology piece, because we spend so much of our time in our environmental spaces. Are they pulling for optimal biology, the health of our biology. And so I really anticipate that we'll see that across the board, whether in corporations, hospitals, nursing homes, and our own, kind of buildings that we are, our domains or domiciles that we're in day to day. And that can be a big, big deal if we're spending most of our lives in those.
Excellent. So you can reach Mollie Eastman at sleepisaskill.com. She's got an Optimize Your Bedroom downloadable that you can find there. Mollie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so interesting of a conversation, and so grateful for the work that you're doing to provide this for people. It's so important.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Live Beyond the Norms podcast. Make sure to subscribe and follow. Also, make sure not to be that guy, the guy sharing this podcast with people who are not interested in living beyond the norms. If you would like to learn more about the ESS60 molecule, the molecule responsible for the single longest longevity experimental result on mammals in history, a full 90% extension of life, visit myvitalc.com. That's myvitalc as in carbon.com.